Want to introduce you all to Dr. Arnold Gorske, who is a longtime friend, and we have been blessed to hear Arnie talk on a number of occasions. But he spends a lot of time, probably more than anybody I know, kind of really trying to research World Health Organization guidelines and standards and what those look like. And I thought his input would be really valuable today. So welcome, Dr. Gorske.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Wonderful to be here with you all. We have a whole lot of material to present today. The topic we have is actually the second most important problem in all of healthcare. The first most critical problem in all of healthcare, Terry briefly mentioned, and that's failure of the church to reassume its responsibilities for the health promotion and health prevention of its community. We've lost that. But the next most important problem is pharmacovigilance. And you all had a chance to read this, so I won't go over it again. But missions and pharmacovigilance is a better title for what we're going to address today. And this is just our open access and fair use notice. All of our materials are available free for downloading. And the other speakers at this conference were invited because of their expertise. And the main reason I was invited was because of my mistakes. I've attended more than 45 drug-based short-term missions, and I've made just about every mistake there was to make. So it includes 20 years in the Navy, and those 15 years with the P&T committee were especially important to me because like many of you in the room here, I devoted my life to becoming the best drug prescribing doctor I possibly could be. Those 30 years in medical missions included 15 years of monthly clinics down a long-term mission in Baja, Mexico, and that was frequently attended by drug-based short-term missions from California and Arizona as well. And then over 45, and then our own drug-based missions, and that's me up there. Now, I never actually said, take the pills and don't ask questions. But I certainly thought it many, many times. And certainly my body language expressed it, especially when there were, it was late in the day and there were scores of patients yet to be seen. But the major crisis in my entire military career was that being ordered into that QA director position. That was a position you had to be ordered into because no one in their right mind would accept it otherwise. I had been a chief of peds at a number of military medical centers, and I had just gotten this department to the point where I could spend more time with my family, and really enjoying seeing patients and training residents, and then I was ordered into this position. And I was down on my knees, Lord, why are you letting this happen to me? And the upside was that the Navy did provide me the very best possible training. They sent me all over the country, invested tens of thousands of your tax dollars into trying to make me knowledgeable in this area. And I'm certain that I saved many, many more lives in that position than I ever could doing anything else as a physician in any specialty anywhere in the world. But that wasn't what I went into medicine for. I wanted to treat patients. So 20 years to the day, I got out and I started going into short-term missions. Well, after that first short-term mission, I understood what the Lord had been doing with me, because it was obvious that the drug-based short-term missions needed that QA training much, much more than the U.S. Navy ever did. So that was a lesson, the first lesson I learned, that the Lord had a better plan for my life than I did. And unfortunately, I didn't remember it very long, because when I started going into missions, short-term missions, instead of trusting the Lord's way of doing short-term missions, I trusted my own drug-based training. And it took instruction from our Christian missionary mentors to set me on the right path. So any life-changing truths that you hear from me today, none of that comes from me. It all comes from our long-term missionary mentors. And the lesson there was the closer that healthcare comes to being evidence-based, the more it confirms the truth of the Bible, and especially the teaching and the example of Jesus. And we'll see that time and time again. So pharmacovigilance, essentially it's the evidence-based use of drugs. And missionary-initiated WHO IS&Gs require there should be no double standards in quality. So the guidelines for drug use on the mission field are exactly the same as they are in the U.S. And these are the abbreviations. CHE is Community Health Education Evangelism, which Terry talked about. It's actually used in hospitals and clinics and at all levels of care, but best provided by the church or missionary to UPGs. CHE-NS is CHE plus health screening, and that's usually done in the church-based setting. CMC is the Christian Medical Commission of the World Health Council of Churches. EB is evidence-based. HP&P is health promotion and prevention, or health education. IS&Gs are international standards and guidelines. Pharmacovig is pharmacovigilance, or evidence-based use of drugs. SDMs is short-term medical missions, and that's medical missions that are drug-based as well as drug-free, HP&P based. And UPGs is unreached people groups, and WHO is World Health Organization. Now, why is this important? How do drugs rank as a cause of death, even in the U.S. with all our pharmacovigilance standards in place? Well, the World Health Organization says that adverse drug reactions are among the leading causes of death in many countries. However, in the U.S. spends billions each year on its safeguards to prevent and treat adverse effects. Just how harmful are our medicines when used in the U.S. With all our safeguards in place? And our safeguards include literate, educated population, package inserts in patient's doctor's language, patient instructions, black box warnings in patient's language, patient medications lists to ensure no drug duplication or incompatibility, pharmacy computers, policies, and procedures to ensure patient receives right drug, right dose, right time, emergency response systems, ERs, and ICUs to care for any adverse effects, poison control centers to manage accidental poisonings, and so on. With all our safeguards in place, how do our medicines rank as a cause of death in the U.S. compared with pulmonary disease, diabetes, AIDS, pneumonia, accident, and so on? Any guesses? 1 to 4? Are they 13 to 16? Greater than 20 down the list? Any guesses? It's at least the 4th leading cause of death. The FDA website reports that adverse drug reactions alone, in hospitals alone, are the 4th leading cause of death, ahead of pulmonary disease, diabetes, AIDS, pneumonia, and accidents. These drug-based death statistics are only for ADRs and only for hospitals. They don't include the number of ADR deaths occurring in the ambulatory patients. Even worse, although ADRs alone are at least our 4th leading cause of death, they represent only a fraction of the drug-based deaths, suffering and financial costs. None of the opioid overdoses are included in that. So drug-based short-term missions, then how do our STM drugs rank as a cause of death? We just heard the U.S. spends billions of dollars each year on its safeguards to prevent adverse effects, yet the FDA reports ADRs alone are the 4th leading cause of death. Just how harmful are medicines when used on STM without our safeguards in place? With all these safeguards in place, how can we even meet our ethical and legal informed consent requirements for patient safety? You know, we would actually, in the state of California anyways, we definitely end up in jail. You know? So WHO IS&Gs initiated by Christian missionaries require there should be no double standards in quality. That's from the World Council of Churches. So in addition, over the years, evidence-based health promotion and prevention, HP&P, has replaced drug therapy as the first-line treatment for most conditions we treat in primary care. That's URIs, diarrhea, back pain, NCDs, headache, fever, and so on. Terry's got the solution over there. It's not our drugs. This is the evidence-based first-line treatment. The IS&Gs report that they're best provided by the church. So in the entire curative care, now what we're talking about is the second most important, most critical problem in all of healthcare. The need for the church to reassume its responsibilities is number one. So the need for pharmacovigilance is now responsible for by far the most deaths and suffering, both in the U.S. and on the mission field. It's also responsible for the waste of tens of billions per year of U.S. healthcare funding desperately needed in other areas. And second only to the need for P&P by the church, it is by far the most important problem in all of healthcare. So the most common area where clinical practice is not in compliance with evidence-based IS&Gs. So we have 21 presentations just on the to address the misuse of our most commonly used drugs. So today we can just provide a brief introduction. But most important, all of the biblical WHO IS&G evidence and materials are already available free for downloading on the following websites. So all of the information is there already. Just have to go to those websites. And the presentations slides will all be available on this website, som.org, but that's still under construction. I'm going to have to go real fast here, and I'm going to have to continue to read the slides. I'm sorry, but I know that's not a good way to learn, and it's not the way I want to teach. But these, in order to meet your CME objectives, I really need to go fast here. So the QA director's first and most important commandment, the Christian missionaries and the biblical basis for quality of care. Avadis Donabedian, beautiful name. He's perhaps the most renowned founder in the study of quality of health care. He worked in the English mission hospital in Jerusalem before he became famous in the secular world. A recent article in the New England Journal, one of the world's most respected secular medical journals, includes one of his more famous quotes. He says, "Ultimately, the secret of quality is love. You have to love your patient, you have to love your profession, you have to love your God. If you have love, you can then work backward and monitor and improve the system." So that comes right from Jesus, you know. And I believe this is the reason that although WHO IS&Gs are often considered secular standards, many of our most respected missionary mentors were often the initiators and provided the studies and the other work necessary for their development. Also, in accordance with the M3 2020 conference theme, can you see it? Sometimes, even if I stand in the middle of the room, no one acknowledges me, and that's drug adverse effects, and that's the elephant in the pharmacy, right there. So, like I say, nearly all of the IS&Gs that we'll address today were actually initiated by our long-term missionary mentors. So where can we find the best available biblical and evidence-based IS&Gs? And that's our best practices website. You click on the health topics page, and then you scroll down to medicines and pharmacovigilance. And when you click on these international standards and guidelines, this is what you will find. WHO evidence-based IS&Gs. These are the guidelines on which we need to base our healthcare practice, especially in other countries. What we have found is, again, the closer medical practice comes to being evidence-based, the more it confirms the truth of the Bible, especially the teaching of Jesus. What you also find, the most important of these IS&Gs were based on the work of Christian missionaries. For example, these WHO primary healthcare IS&Gs were founded on the biblical-based work of Christian missionaries going back to the 60s and 70s. They were adopted by WHO in its 1978 Declaration of Alma Ata, which was co-authored by Carl Taylor, a missionary member of the Christian Medical Commission. They were both published in 2008, and they completely changed my life as a missionary. They also forced me to acknowledge the greatest failure of my 50-year medical career. And these systems have now been at least partially adopted by most countries throughout the world, benefiting millions of people. If our goals are to save the most lives, prevent the most suffering, next to the Bible itself, these IS&Gs are among the most important documents available anywhere. For example, prayer. This is a WHO document here. Prayer, number 1. So another example of closer healthcare comes from being evidence-based, more it confirms the truth of the Bible. And that shouldn't surprise us. Jesus told us, I am the way and the truth. Evidence-based medicine, healthcare is founded on the truth, which is how a handful of Christian missionaries was able to change the world. These Christian missionaries are actually credited with inventing the very term primary care. So the best healthcare system in the world. The bad news, very few U.S. healthcare organizations, churches, or missions are using it. What we call primary care in the U.S. is not primary care. We failed to implement the most important part, the church-based health promotion prevention system to prevent 70%. It's actually, well, Terry has left. It's actually 70% of the disease burden. So we did not implement that part of the system at all, the most important part. Instead, we not only continued to use the same curative care system that the CMC documented was a failure over 50 years ago, but we have gone even farther in the exact opposite direction from the CMC and the WHO. Although most U.S. hospitals used to be run by the church, always used to be, you know, it's Lutheran General, Presbyterian, all that's gone now. The U.S. church has abandoned its healthcare responsibilities almost entirely. So, and our U.S. faith-based culture has now been replaced by a health and pharmaceutical industry drug-based culture. Until the last two generations, like I say, even most U.S. hospitals were run by the church. It used to be when U.S. churches were still involved with healthcare, and before tens of billions were invested in U.S. drug marketing, when we or our loved ones became ill, we followed the evidence-based teaching and healing example of Jesus and prayed and cared for each other. Jesus taught in medical science and NIH have long confirmed our bodies were designed to be self-healing and to respond to our beliefs. You know, if we believe, we know from tens and tens of thousands of scientific studies that if we believe a pill is going to heal us, it will heal us. Yeah. It's no difference. If we believe prayer will heal us, it will heal us. And for some of our medications, like some of our most expensive NSAIDs, one in particular that was really promoted by the drug reps because it was better than the chondroitin sulfate and so on for treatment of osteoarthritis. And it was very effective. It had a p-value of 0.008. It took only it only took 10 patients to benefit one individual. But then if you looked at the placebo effect, how many people did that benefit? And you find out that it was 6 out of the 10 responded to the placebo effect. So here we have one of our most expensive NSAIDs, you know, performing only benefits for 1 out of 10, when the placebo or faith effect, as Jesus, and one of the two things that Jesus always said when when he healed someone, one of them was he always said, well, first of all, he always touched them. Those are the two things that Jesus always did when he healed someone. He always touched them, and Dr. Paul Brand, one of our great missionary docs, has written several books, but he talks about the importance of touch, of demonstrating love. And that's what he says was Jesus' main mission. You know, the main thing he was trying to do with that healing, with that touching, was to demonstrate love. You know, the second thing that Jesus always said was, your faith has made you whole. So he knew this long before the NIH, long before our placebo-controlled studies. So it all depends on what we believe in. So, but today, when our patients develop symptoms of any type, headache, runny nose, cough, heartburn, what is it that they think of first and foremost? That's what they think. Legal and illegal. We consume more drugs per person, both legal and illegal, than any other culture in the world. Now, why is that? Well, you know, the drug companies always say they spend so much, they have to charge such prices because of what they spend on R&D. Well, the last statistics that I saw, that the amount that they spend on R&D is quite substantial for the top 10 drug companies. It's actually something like $67 billion. But then you look at what they spend on sales and marketing, and how much do you think that is? It's almost $100 billion. Right. And then we wonder, you know, how many of you were born after 1982? Well, there's a few of you in here. Okay. Well, you've never known a culture where prescription drug advertising hasn't been pervasive. You know, we're one of only 2 countries in the world that allows that. The others, New Zealand, they control their drug companies, so they're irrelevant. So we're the only country in the world that allows this. And if you look at when, you know, if we look at when our drug prices and so on started going up like this instead of along with the rest of the world, when do you think that happened? It was when drugs advertising became legal. 1982 was when it happened. So that you can just see that trend right there. So we don't really, you know, we always talk about, well, you know, we need to understand the culture we're going into. We have to understand our own culture. You know, what is that doing to us? You know, we think these ads aren't affecting us. You know, but drug companies wouldn't hire all these psychologists if they weren't being effective. And us docs, it's worse. Their highest return on their advertising comes from us docs. You know, for every $1 that they spend on advertising to us docs, they get 6 in return. So we're as susceptible as anyone else. We're actually more susceptible than the others. So we have a drug-based culture. So a local church and the missing link and the key to primary care. So according to biblically based IS&Gs, the only systems failure that causes more unnecessary deaths and suffering in healthcare than the need for pharmacovigilance is the need for health promotion and prevention by the church. And you can state it another way. According to the IS&Gs, the leading and primary cause of unnecessary deaths and suffering in the U.S. and globally is this fundamental systems failure, the need for health promotion and prevention by the church. That NCDs, tobacco, and so on are all secondary causes. You know, the main cause is that the church has just abandoned its responsibility. So in spite of having the best emergency and subspecialty care in the world and spending multiple times more per person than other countries, this is the result. We're 43rd below the best in outcome. Yet cost per capita is now multiple times lower. And you know, we used to think this has been going on for over 35 years. And all the studies, we used to think that the data was, you know, was fixed. But all the studies over the past 35 years have shown the same thing. The only thing that's changed is our costs have continued to rise and our quality has continued to fall. That's the only thing that's changed. And it's confirmed by numerous others, even our own CIA says the same thing. You know, and life expectancy at birth has also measured the overall quality of life in a country and summarizes mortality at all ages. So there's a critical need, and Terry and I will be talking about this afternoon. There's a critical need for SDM pharmacists, physicians, and primary care subspecialists, and nurses, and other healthcare providers to assist the local church and Ministry of Health in establishing this best healthcare system in the world. Very simple process. You know, so what does the Bible have to do with WHO, IS&Gs? Where does evidence-based business all start? Well, this is the very first recorded clinical trial, and even our secular colleagues all agree this is true. Daniel refused to defile himself with the royal food and wine. Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink for 10 days. Compare your appearance with the young men who eat royal food and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. At the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the others. They took away their choice food and wine and gave them vegetables to eat instead. And when their training was complete, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than them all. So, if we hope to improve the quality of care of host countries, we first must evaluate the quality of care we are exporting. And Babylon was the most powerful and advanced nation in the world. The king's intentions for Daniel's care were the very best. Daniel was also be given the very best training. The king was providing what he was certain was the very best care and what he used for himself and his family. But for Daniel and God and current evidence-based clinical guidelines, the care and example provided by the most advanced nation in the world was wrong. So again, lessons learned from this first clinical trial is applicable today as 2,600 years ago. Now, remarkably, these biblical guidelines is applicable not only as evidence-based universal truths, but also specifically concerning the value of whole food plant-based diet as confirmed by current evidence-based IS&Gs. For example, biblical truth is the very foundation of the evidence-based HPMP solution to the leading cause of unnecessary death and suffering in the U.S. and globally. Unhealthy diet has now surpassed tobacco. So, and it's confirmed by numerous evidence-based studies, as well as, Samaritan's Purse's vascular surgeon Richard Furman, as well as Houston's Michael DeBakey. And as wonderful a surgeon as he is, he probably saved many more lives with this book than he did with all the surgeries that he performed. Surgeons have a better understanding of our primary care profession than we do, I often think. So, and that tobacco is no longer number one is largely due to the health ed efforts of another world-famous Christian pediatric surgeon, C. Everett Koop. Koop, a devout evangelical Christian, stressed education as the key to disease prevention. He was a Surgeon General from 82 to 89. And no federal official, here's a quote of his, the entire enterprise of big tobacco is the largest concentration of evil masquerading as a legitimate business on this planet. Nowadays, there's other industries that could be classified that way as well. But no federal official before or since U.S. Surgeon General Koop have waged a more determined campaign against smoking. Actually, Dr. Koop was one of my instructors in my pediatric training, and excellent surgeon. He actually became world famous for the first one to separate conjoined twins. So, wonderful teacher. So, and the diet is number one is also confirmed by WHO IS&Gs. So, where can we find the IS&Gs, and who is responsible? Who is responsible for initiating them? Well, you go to our nutrition webpage. The above IS&Gs promoting whole food plant-based eating originated with the work of Christian missionaries in Africa. Trowell and Burkitt, again a Christian surgeon, also worked with the WHO and are recognized founders of modern nutrition. Now, I learned about Burkitt in medical school, but it was only because of Burkitt lymphoma. I never knew he was a Christian until just a few years ago, and never knew he had anything to do with nutrition. Of course, I didn't know anything about nutrition anyways until a few years ago. So it was Dr. Burkitt, a missionary surgeon, who discovered the leading cause of unnecessary death and suffering in the world. Man, what would we do without these surgeons? Yeah, well, I shouldn't talk that way. They already know. So, and he did it in Africa over 50 years ago. Though Daniel did publish his results 2,600 years earlier. So, again, closer, healthier comes to being evidence-based, more it confirms the truth of the Bible, and most important, evidence-based IS&Gs originate by Christian missionaries. Okay, why we need evidence-based medicine? Well, it's for this reason, and as well, it's also the same reason that doctors so often disagree. There's an information explosion. It's no longer possible to keep up with all the thousands of studies. We each based our treatment on those studies that are brought to our attention. The validity of evidence of individual studies, even from our very best journals, even New England Journal and Lancet that I continue to get, the validity from those studies is usually poor. And the good evidence in medical literature is very rare and difficult to find. So where do we find the truth, the most important evidence-based knowledge? Well, that's where we need to look for our guidelines for how we practice medicine. It's in these organizations, the Cochrane, the IOM, the BMJ's clinical evidence, ACP, HRQ, and the WHO. Because evidence-based medicine requires the team approach. You need teams of statisticians and epidemiologists and clinical experts to review all the available evidence from all the sources. There's only a few organizations in the entire world that have the resources to do that. So WHO has thousands of staff members. They provide these teams from 194 member countries. In addition, they also rely on over 700 collaborating partners, just one of which is the CDC with its additional thousands of statisticians. You need the statisticians and epidemiologists to look at the study to determine whether it's valid. Most of the studies are very, very poorly, really don't mean anything. And unless you have the statisticians and the epidemiologists, none of us can determine that. So what is it that these teams evaluate? Well, this is the highest level of evidence. The gold standard for drug benefits is the systematic review of randomized controlled trials. But it's not very good for drug adverse effects or non-drug treatment. And this is a significant problem with evidence-based guidelines. Evidence-based guidelines all often originally erroneously rate drugs higher than non-drug treatment. And the reasons include the inability to design placebo-controlled studies for non-drug treatment. People know when they're eating kale. Drug trials are primarily designed to determine effectiveness, not harm. Patients with complicating problems are excluded. Inadequate reporting of drug adverse effects. Now that's a big one. We've had cold medicines in pediatrics that had been on the market for 20 to 30 years before enough evidence that they were killing enough kids was reported so that they could be taken off. So that's a big problem. Based on evidence-based clinical guidelines, none of you, I hope, are prescribing cold medicines. Based on evidence-based clinical guidelines, we stopped prescribing cold and cough medicines in pediatrics in our pediatrics department in 1974 or 76. And since that time, the evidence has just become overwhelming. So, well, I'm sure none of you prescribe. So over the years, HPNP has now surpassed drug treatment for first-line treatment for most primary care conditions. For example, NSAIDs and back pain. So originally, as far as treatment for chronic low back pain, drug-based treatment was rated beneficial at the very top. And then it was rated likely to be beneficial a number of years later. And now it's rated here, trade-off between benefits and harms. Evidence-based health promotion and prevention treatment, exercise, was originally rated unknown effectiveness. Then a number of years later, likely to be beneficial, and now it's rated beneficial. So, and ACP 2017 guidelines report this is now true for acute and subacute back pain as well. So the evidence-based first-line treatment for most common complaint of adults evaluated on most of our SDMs, back pain, is now evidence-based HPNP, not drugs. And there's no time to demonstrate this today, but reviews of evidence-based guidelines state that this is true for most conditions treated in primary care, both in the US and on SDMs, URIs, diarrhea, back pain, and so on. Hopefully we'll get to worms as well. So expert opinion, that's the lowest level of acceptable evidence. What about drug detailer information and advertising? It's misleading, results in unnecessary treatment and costs, and is harmful or deadly to patients. Now, this is a quote from 200 of our most respected medical experts, deans of medical schools, and so on. Only 6% of drug advertising detailing information material provided to physicians is supported by the evidence. That's from the New England Journal of Medicine. So, from an evidence-based quality of care standpoint, never read drug company ads or detailing information. Never. Also, for quality of care and compliance with missionary-initiated ISNGs, unless you are enrolled in an ongoing study, never use new drug samples until they're recommended by an evidence-based guideline. What about in my experience? Here I have this 50 years of experience. What's that worth? Well, increased years of clinical experience, decreased quality of care. My residents love that one. But I've also heard residents say the very same thing. Now, why should you never listen to us docs when we begin our recommendations with, in my experience? What evidence-based biblical truth does every kid with a paper cut know that we docs always forget? All of us have this problem, and I still forget it. Our bodies were created to be self-healing. Most of our patients are healed in spite of us, not because of us. So my 50 years doesn't mean a thing, not a thing. Well, except we old-timers definitely need to take, if we keep up with and base our practice on current evidence-based guidelines and not our own experience, but if we do that, we have a tremendous advantage over our younger colleagues. We can look back on the mistakes we made and learn from them. So that's what we're going to review today in the little time we have left. Missionary mentors pharmacovigilance is the critical importance of systems. To understand the world, well, this is, I don't know how much time do I have left? Oh, japers. Well, I'm sorry. I'll be sticking around after, so if you have any questions, didn't really get to my worst mistakes, but I'll have to have to say that for next time. So thank you for putting up with this. I know this is difficult to listen to, but thank you very much.